Hello everyone, welcome to Cielo, Falso, Season 3, Chapter 3. We are very happy and honored to have Arjen Oosterman today with us tonight. And we'll have a small discussion about topics that he presented, and you can check the video before, and we'll also go into some ideas and exchanges of what architecture has been in a critical side and what would be architecture in a new century, and Arjen's experience, and also in pedagogic means and content. So Arjen, welcome.
Thank
again.
You.
Arjen, you're an architecture critic, writer, educator, and you're based in the Netherlands, and you're editor-in-chief of Volume magazine. Volume magazine.
Ta-da.
There we go, the new format. We have a first of premiere here.
Yeah.
And it's very important for us and very important for a whole generation of architects who had the chance to access this information, especially those who had the opportunity to pursue education abroad, beyond Chile. And then, as we discussed today, we also had the chance when we worked in academic institutions to subscribe to Volume. And it was always a moment of expectation to receive the magazine. And now, how many years afterwards? 13 years. There's so many content, and it's like digging in, as DJs look for special records. You go to dig into Volume magazine, and you find some treasures that you didn't, or you missed at some point. So it will be very interesting, and we're very happy again to have you here. So the first question would be, since Volume proclaimed to go beyond architecture, yes, right? And also the content was related that I remember this claim of everything that it's surrounding architecture or has a deep influence in architecture, power, politics, and so forward. I remember there was even a scheme, and it went beyond a territorial or specific concern of one country or one region. Mm-hmm. I remember a diagram where you had all the presidents of the Americas. Mm-hmm. So you had George Bush and even at that time Michelle Bachelet with the different outfits they were using for their political discourse. Yeah. I remember George Bush having a long list of outfits. We had then I think it was Chavez also had a long list, and Michelle Bachelet had like 3 outfits.
Yeah,
so
right.
That was interesting and appealing to have a discussion locally. Mm-hmm. So in that terms, what would be your reading of the state of the art that you were manifesting at that first time, and 13 years later, mm-hmm, what will be your opinion, yeah, of today?
Right. Yeah, well, the Volume project, because it was called a project, it was a collaboration between 3 parties to form a magazine, Arjen, which is a Dutch-based magazine, then the office of Rem Koolhaas, more specifically AMO, their mm-hmm, research component or think tank, mm-hmm, and Columbia University, CLAB, laboratory for broadcasting architecture, from Mark Wigley. These 3 joined forces in the Volume project, and it was in 2005. And mm-hmm, it is of importance to mention that date, because in 2005, that were the heydays of star architecture, mm-hmm, and that very much defined the scene of architecture. It wasn't, of course, describing the reality of architecture, but it attracted all the attention. Exactly. And I think that the 3 parties jointly got fed up with this situation, mm-hmm, and jointly decided we should do something about it. We should try to go beyond that reality and explore other fields, other terrains, other territories that are so needed as part of the education of architects, as part of the practice of architects, but also in relation to society. What does society need from architects? So let's not start from the question, what can architects make? What could they produce and present. No, what does society need from architects? Do they need? Does it need anything? It's an open question, and we tried to put that question as open on the table to address it, and not decide beforehand that architecture was of importance at all. So it was quite radical, that starting point. And the 54 issues that we've created so far are explorations still of that very question. So the question to go beyond architecture is actually the question to go beyond a certain kind of architecture, to open up the field to other definitions and other ideas about architecture. And the issue that you just described was the architecture of power, and that power has its own architecture, not confined to the buildings, the huge imposing complexes, and maybe the military part of that idea, but that's also dressing and maybe speech and all sorts of components that are as well designed and make up the whole idea, the architecture of that performance, and that reality.
And how was that the feedback or the first conclusions you maybe can tell us about? Because I remember when we were, again, very inspired and motivated by the magazine, but at the same time we showed it to some colleagues, some elder colleagues, and they immediately reacted and said, but where's the architecture in this magazine? I don't see any plans, I don't see any buildings, I don't see no design.
Where's my building?
Where's my building and where's you at least? But so that was a kind of strong confrontation, and I remember also that we were willing, the best option that we could have is to be published in volume and not at El Croquis or other magazines, and that made also a kind of difficult generation discussion because it was confusing. So should we go to the Pritzker Prize, or should we go to the Peace Nobel, or should we go to other concerns? I think that was a very appealing question and discussion. Did you have any kind of feedback? Did you have reactions? Criticisms to the critical point of view?
Absolutely. Oh yes.
Can you share a bit about?
No, it was a watershed.
Okay.
Absolutely. So this choice, it was not completely out of the blue. If you look at the developments of Arches in the period 2001-2004, then you already see traces of what the more radical step of volume eventually became. And also during that period, we had to say farewell to a couple of subscribers that were not willing or able to follow our path, you could say, or were simply not interested in pursuing that kind of thinking and exploration. And that is all, you could say, part of the deal. We accepted that the fact that we had to leave behind a certain part of the population calling themselves architects. We were not
discrediting you
to,
of not being architects.
It was
Could
disconnecting.
that happen?
Pardon?
That also happened? Like
no, not necessarily that we're not architects, because in the editorial board there's always been architects as well. So I'm not an architect. I'm trained as an architectural historian, an art historian.
Yes.
So was Ole Bouwman, the former editor-in-chief. And Lilette as well, but there's currently also an architect on board, and even in editorial boards before, there was always architects around as well. So it was not necessarily that this tribe of critics that I just described had taken over and were sort of against architects. That's not the case at all. And well, I said Mark Wigley is an architect, Rem Koolhaas is an architect, and they were also part of the deal, part of the project. So the issue is not to be against architects, the issue is to pose the right questions and be willing to draw some conclusions based on that. And one of the conclusions was that architects and architecture had to be less addicted to the building, the object, and the beauty of it, and more open to what architecture can contribute to society next to that kind of reality. Not that we're against beautiful buildings. Beautiful buildings are fine, are great. Sure, please make beautiful buildings. But maybe it's not enough to make beautiful buildings. Maybe there's more needed, and maybe it's more influential. Because I would say you can spend your energy and intelligence only once, and then the decision what I'm going to spend it on is an important one. And if you feel that your contribution is, that your gift is to create beautiful buildings, I again would say please do. But if you have the idea that you could also have other options to manifest yourself within your profession and include different range and possibilities, then I would also encourage that, if possible. And the reality, overlooking the period from, because that was also part of your question, overlooking the period from 2005 up to the present, I'd say we're not completely taken over by reality, but you could say that part of our program, if I hate the word program, but between brackets, absolutely, but part of the program has become reality, whether it was because of us or it was despite our efforts. The reality of unsolicited architecture, the reality of a research-based kind of architecture, an investigative architecture, that's what we see around.
Yes.
Fortunately, I would say.
Yes.
And less the focus on the author and the absolute object.
And how did it came around? Because what I like about the discussion proclaimed by volume and the influence in different people, you could almost recognize somebody in the room in an architectural cocktail or event or pseudo-glamorous architectural world. Those who have read volume or those who wouldn't have read volume. And there was this kind of situation of polarization when at some moment everything was oriented on the autonomy of architecture and denying the research and maybe 90s festivity at one moment we also had a kind of contact with the Dutch architecture scene and being at the Bellage and so forth. And then we knew Archis and then Volume and Columbia, some other colleagues also, and suddenly those interests came back in some format. And I have not tested the hypothesis, a kind of not fake news, but a kind of fake theory that younger generations were appealed and awoke again to those interests beyond again architecture and be interested in politics and in power. We had a lot of very important student manifestations in Chile and lately feminist manifestations, and they have their own spatial manifestation in the city. And those arose again a lot of questions, and I think younger generations of architects are very connected to that and see again content like, for example, those of Volume, even as an example for understanding those phenomena. So have you perceived this in some moment? Have you seen this, your experimentations and your debates in Volume transcended the magazine and became a way of operating and tools for generations or other discussions in architecture?
I said that is the development that I do see, but I have to be very modest on how much influence Volume had on these situations. I think that the crisis was in that sense maybe
for example,
a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
Of course, we suffered a lot. Everyone suffered a lot from the crisis, but it brought some good things. And for instance, that the focus on the star project sort of diminished, and that there was a renewed interest in the social dimension of architecture, and maybe even the political dimension, although the political dimension still is a rather feeble component in the story, unfortunately, because I do think that architecture is has a very strong political component, but that's still not widely recognized, I think, that's not as far as I see. But for sure, social interest is clear. And also if I look among my students in the academies, at universities, this shift is quite present. Also, if you would, for instance, look at the arguably selection, of, international selection of best graduation projects, there is over the years, it started in 2001, the international version, and it's now 19, so quite a period. It's so interesting to see that in the first ones you saw lots of Beaux-Arts like bravura projects, big stadiums or super whatever. And nowadays it's far more about social housing, about for sure sustainability, but then implicitly, not necessarily as the topic of design, but as something that for sure is part and parcel of what you're doing as an architect. If you're a sensible architect, then it has to be sustainable, right? It's no longer an issue in the sense of something of special interest. No, it's part, as I said, part and parcel of the way you perform your profession. So, yeah, definitely a lot of shifts and changes that are interesting. And another one is that with the introduction of the digital component in architecture and in architectural thinking, which is still rather marginal, but it's becoming slightly stronger, there also this redefinition of the role of the author is at stake again. What struck us in some experiments or conferences that we did, where we brought together what we call coders and architects, both architects actually, but different professions, was that first of all, these two worlds don't know how to communicate. They don't have a common language. And yes, they are interested in each other. Basically, they don't know how to bridge the gap. That's another component. But then that what's so defining for the world of the coder is that the coder works on the effect, and the coder does not promote him or herself. The author of the code is unknown, is abstract, where the author of the design is very well known, is essential to be known as the author of the design, because that'll produce more assignments and more work. And that observation, but also that reality is a difficult one.
It's a difficult, and especially when we take it in concerns of academia, which kind of architects are we training?
Yeah, absolutely.
With what is the culture behind architecture, which we validate? Yeah. In a way, we had this conversation about the difference between a coder and an architect, or how you analyze architectural discourse, or the discourse of architects is always a subtext of promoting themselves. And this is very hard, because when you go to another discipline, it could be coders, it could be geographers, anthropologists, and your discourse is about promoting how good are your ideas, it's very difficult to find a bridge of communication, because most of the time they're concerned about issues, right? Segregation in urban space, or the gentrification. But if your discourse is, look how cool I am because I just found out about this, it's a difficult bridge. So in terms of training students, you have an academic background, you also relate to students. How is this issue relating with them, and how are you approaching this situation?
I think that we as tutors have a very important role there, and it probably starts with how the project, the assignment for the students is defined. And if we define it in terms of a unique production or a unique product to be produced within this assignment that the student is assessed on, then that'll reproduce this idea of the author, the uniqueness and all that, where you can also define the assignment in terms of collaborative work, for instance, or multidisciplinary ways of working. and make that even obligatory. So if the assignment is to make an intervention in a barrio, then maybe it's not a good idea to create a shining object in that situation, but to be in touch with anthropologists, sociologists, maybe a few other disciplines, and for sure with the local people to start with, and from that define what the actual problem is and how that can be addressed and what a proper way of working could be, instead of just jumping at a solution and then shifting it.
And do you see reception in academia of this ways of collaborative and
I think it's growing.
The
The reality is of course a difficult one. Actually, we're currently negotiating a course for next year with the Academy of Architecture, with the Art Academy Rietveld, and with digital design from yet another school, so 3 schools. But the very practical thing of how to combine in time the curricula, how to assess that students from these different directions come together and each have to get their diploma, right, at the end of the show. It's silly stuff, but
it gets on the way.
Preventing so much and makes things difficult. But maybe that makes these experiments more important to try. And in due time, I think that the various schools and academies will, by necessity, be more interdisciplinary in organization and will search themselves for these in-between areas to include and to cover.
And to approach complexity, as you were showing. It's very difficult from just one discipline have a whole understanding of this complexity.
Yeah, no,
right?
absolutely.
So,
Sure. Yeah.
And now we go to the final part, which is a more personal part.
Okay.
So the question, do you have a main motivation or personal agenda or inspiration that pushes you to put yourself in this kinds of problems, making magazines that shakes the heads
Why
of people?
worry at all?
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any kind
You
of
could also be happy.
Yeah, you could stay in making
right. Yeah, it's
nice
curiosity.
shiny buildings.
The saying is curiosity killed the cat, but I think that curiosity is a driver. And I never call myself a journalist. I don't think that I'm equipped as a journalist, and I may maybe also not really be equipped as a scientist. But I'm curious, and what we do in volume, each of us, I think, is trying to make sense of what we see around us. First of all, to come to grips, and then next is perhaps an idea on how that could affect other people or a situation. But it probably starts with this very selfish point to try to understand and come to grips.
Wow,
That's the driver.
Fantastic. Now we're going to the Marcel Proust questionnaire, which you can see from James Lipton or Bernard Pivot or even in Vanity Fair. But it's a very short version, so don't be scared.
Okay.
So there's quick answers. Yeah. What's your idea of earthly happiness, Arjen?
Earthly happiness. Yeah, then I'm always inclined to look into the to the audience and look at my wife, but that's such a pathetic answer, still I stick to that.
Great, fantastic. You will have a reward for that. Who is your favorite hero in fiction or reality?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
For a long time I thought Oblomov.
Who?
Oblomov.
I don't know.
Oblomov.
Who is?
Yeah, Oblomov is a literary figure from Russian literature.
Okay.
And it's the guy that doesn't know how to be happy.
Okay.
Actually.
And the other side of it.
That's the other side, yeah. And there is
it's a fictional character.
Something. It's fictional, yeah. But it is something appealing about that attitude.
Okay, great. Who's your favorite heroine in fiction or reality?
Heroine.
Heroine, female.
Yeah.
Hero.
Now I don't know what to say.
To take your time. We can even cut
right.
out.
Yeah. This one has to be clipped, I think.
Yeah.
Heroin. What is a good one?
Could be fiction or reality too.
Yeah, sure. And the point is that my memory for names is so horrible.
Oh, really? Okay.
It is, yeah, it's absolutely horrible. I can just remember my own name and then that's about it. I was quite struck by one of the but again the name escapes me, one of the politicians in the US that stepped to the fore and gained quite serious popularity by being herself.
Oh, it's
and that was
composed
maybe,
name.
Yeah, that was maybe the most
because
amazing,
it's a complicated name. It's Aloisa. It's a Latin name, no?
Yeah, Latin name.
Yeah. We can put it in here.
Yeah, sure.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
I follow her on Instagram.
Yeah.
Very good example. 2 last questions. What reform do you admire the most?
Reform? How should I interpret that question?
As you wish. Political, intellectual.
I thought that the
Cortés, Alois Cortés.
Yes, it's close to that.
Sorry.
Words,
if the audience can help us, you can Google your... No? You're awake?
It sounds like the good name, the right name. I thought that the legalization of wheat in
the Netherlands.
And no, not in the Netherlands
the world
yet.
or in America.
In what is it, Uruguay?
Oh, Uruguay. Yes.
Was pretty brave.
For the context.
Action. And so sensible. In my opinion.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Last one. What is your motto?
My
motto, like your claim.
My claim.
Personal claim.
My claim. Someone laughing in the audience. We know
you
who
cannot
it is.
say it publicly, maybe.
No. No, sorry, I can't think of anything present.
Okay.
Sort of
that's
blocked.
fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Arjen.
Hey, I want to hand you these, of course.
Fantastic. So here we go, the new volume format, and we'll jump to the 21st century of discussion. Arjen, again, thank you very much for your time and generosity.
Thanks for your invitation.
So, we go to the next chapter of Cielo, Falso. Great.